And hello, KRTS listeners. And thank you so much for tuning into Marfa Public Radio, located with great community strength at 93.5 on your FM dial. Marfa Public Radio is radio for a wide range, and no matter how smoky that range may get, if you are looking for up-to-date information related to the Rock House fire, please check us out on marfapublicradio.com. That's www.marfapublicradio.com, or on Facebook, or of course, right here at 93.5 FM. I am Jason Kolker, sometimes known by my nickname Oslo, and I welcome you to the Talk at 10 interview show. I'm very happy. Actually, I'm thrilled. I'll say it. I'm thrilled to be interviewing Dr. Cecilia Thompson today. Dr. Thompson is the author of the 2-volume History of Marfa and Presidio County, a work that investigates and brings to life this area from as far back as 1535, goes all the way, or comes all the way, to the end of World War II. And that book won the Fehrenbach Book Award from the Texas Historical Commission. It is a serious history. It's a serious book. And there is another volume in progress now that will chart the course of Marfa and surrounding communities from 1946 to a very contemporary 2005. And we'll ask Dr. Thompson about that in just a moment. However, in addition to her work as a historian, Dr. Cecilia Thompson is known around town, known around Presidio County, known around the community, to many of us as something of a cultural pillar, maybe even a cultural midwife, if you think the town is in the constant progress of being born, which I would like to believe. She is someone who's been in this area on and off for a long time, has lived in Marfa, has lived in Fort Davis, has lived in Alpine, and has brought education, erudition, art, vitality, every step along the way. I spoke with many people about Dr. Thompson before this interview, not necessarily in preparation, but also just for fun. And to a person, they all gave me the impression that this is someone who has helped or is helping Marfa become what it is today. So, Dr. Thompson, thank you very much for being here. And happy birthday. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much.
I know it was your birthday April 10th, but that's close enough for me. I told you when you walked in. By the way, you can't see, but Dr. Thompson is dressed very, very nicely, and I'm wearing a KRTS shirt. This is my formal wear. And I don't know if that's your birthday wear, but you're looking very nice. And when you came in, I remembered to take off my hat first thing, because my research had told me that you are hat etiquette is something that's very important to you.
That's quite right, And I'm surprised that my reputation has gone so far.
Well, I dug deep, I'll tell you. And the other thing is that hat etiquette is something that kind of is now stuck in the island of Texas, because way back when John F. Kennedy had his inauguration, he took his hat off and kept it off for a while. He had a very handsome stove-top hat, and he took it off and kept it off for a while. And the legend is that since that time, hats have just fallen out of favor. But Texas is different. In Texas, a hat still can get away as formal wear, especially if you take it off inside. Is that right?
Exactly. Always a gentleman removes his hat when he enters a door.
And what about tipping hats?
Well, that's part of the hat culture. Gentlemen tip their hats when they meet ladies.
Well, good. I mean, I hope that remains. I'm pessimistic, because what I see replacing hat etiquette are truck driver hats, which instead of having like the dignification of like this kind of ornament on your head, are more often advertisements for bowling alleys or what have you.
I have a feeling that most people who wear caps and that kind of unique hat are unaware of the fact that they have anything on their heads.
Folks, write in, email, call. We're making hat comments. Cecilia, or Dr. Thompson, may I call you Cecilia, or would you
Yes,
like?
please
Okay.
do.
Cecilia, I would like to start off with this fire that we've had for the last week. And I have your books here, and I'm guessing it's about 600 pages of writing. If you were writing your history of Presidio County today, how much historical weight, relatively speaking, would you give to this Rock House fire? Is this as stupendous and unique as it feels to us?
It is a historic size. I don't know anyone who recalls that there's ever been anything like this out here. We've had fires, range fires, that have consumed a lot of acreage. But this is most unusual. It's so scattered and it's exceeded 106,000 acres already, I hear. So it is a historic moment.
Right. And what do you make of that? It seems that if that's the case, if we're dealing with a once in a lifetime, or according to your history, once in centuries type of fire, then we're doing very well.
Well, it's so dry, for one thing. We haven't had any rain for a number of months. And the winds have exceeded the usual amount of spring wind. And that has accounted for a lot of the spreading of the fire. So it's nature that has conspired against us.
Well, right. So what I'm saying, it's nature that's conspired against us, but it's community that has allied with us, because no one has been hurt, no one has been killed, and I think that's because of people.
I think so. The people out here are very caring. They rush to one another's aid. And I know on many of the houses in Fort Davis, example, have burned, and people were right there to help them. So there's no question but that the people in West Texas care about one another, and they really do help when it comes to an emergency situation.
Was the community this tight 50 years ago or 150 years ago?
You mean Marfa? There's a difference in the communities.
Okay.
Alpine, Marfa, and Fort Davis are all different. They were originated differently. They attracted the different kind of people in the beginning to a large extent, and they've certainly developed differently.
Well, okay, let's just go where that takes us. How are they different? You say they attracted a different kind of person. Why would that be?
Well, it depended on how they originated, really. Fort Davis, for example, originated from the Fort Davis that was established in 1854, and Irish soldiers inhabited it until the Civil War. Then in 1867, the black soldiers came in, and a community grew up around the fort. And most of the people who originally came to the community were support elements, merchants and bakers and people of that sort. But then the ranchers who came to that area came at the same time, and they established large ranches that were set in the mountains. So they were threatened by different things so far as the elements were concerned, and early by the Indians. So they were a hardy lot in that area. Alpine was established when the first train came through. It was called Murphyville, and it attracted ranchers in that area.
When did that first train come through?
Through Alpine in 1882.
Okay.
Through Marfa in 1883. But Marfa was, I think, has the most fascinating origin of any, because when the train came through, there was nothing here. And so at first there was just a saloon and a restaurant. But almost immediately there started
I'm with you. Let me have a little bit to drink here.
a little community. And it brought a number of ranchers. Before they had driven their herds out here from central Texas, and that was a long trek. But when the train came, they had a way to ship them out. Also, they were satisfied that there was going to be some kind of settlement here. So the first ranchers who came to this area were a rather unusual lot. For one thing, they came from settled parts of the state. And then for another thing, and this I think is most outstanding about the Marfa area, they had the wisdom to marry educated, cultured women, and they brought them with them.
Well, I was going to say, where do you find them? I mean, if you're coming out west with
They found them where they had lived. They lived around Austin and that central part of Texas. But they didn't. There were no women out here then.
That's right.
There is. I've been told repeatedly that when they started hiring teachers as tutors on ranches, they didn't last very long at all because the cowboys grabbed them up.
Right.
But there were no women. There was no one here.
But how interesting that that would be a real priority for the Marfa ranchers.
It was true of most of the ranchers to some degree, but it was especially evident in the Marfa area.
Do you think that's contributed to the personality of Marfa all the way up to today?
I certainly do. I certainly do.
So it's kind of in the DNA of the town somewhat to aspire to culture and the arts and so forth.
Early Marfa had an opera house. They had performances by opera companies, Shakespearean companies that came through on the train, and they would stay overnight and perform.
Where was the opera house?
Where the old Palace Theater is now. The cornerstone is in the back of that building. It's called the Marfa Opera House.
Okay, now, but Marfa did not have its own opera company.
Oh, no.
Right.
No.
But Marfa, I heard from a friend of mine, Mercer Black, that Marfa had a polo team, and that seems even more rarefied than an opera house.
Well, it wasn't Marfa. It was the Army. The cavalry had a polo team.
Well, who would they play?
Well, they played other military posts, and they went into Mexico and played Mexican teams. But you're right, there were no polo players natively here. These were cowboys.
Sure.
You'd be interested to know, I think, that the polo grounds out at the old fort occupied that area that's now where the Donald Judd's cement pieces are.
Oh, is that right? Well, that kind of sticks with the idea that there's a certain kind of art DNA here. I mean, polo, I suppose, even in the 20s, or particularly in the 20s, was kind of an aristocratic sport, and art in the 1970s was a little bit aristocratic too.
Well, I think Marfa had a good start in that direction because these people who came out in the early days, the women, for example, established a history club. They established the first school, which was located in the chapel that Buck Johnson and Camp Bosworth have.
Do you think, Cecilia, I'm overreaching then, just by given what we said for the last 5 minutes, that if Marfa might be different than other West Texas towns and that it has a little bit more of a feminine touch?
Oh, absolutely. Not only originally did it have that cultural sheen, but then the military came in, and the military brought a cosmopolitan element, a sophistication. They mingled with the ranchers. They enjoyed the same social life. The ranch people went to the officers' club. The officers attended the local ranch parties. So there was that influence from the outside that the other areas didn't have.
Well, then I'm tempted to say, where did that go? If we're having a renaissance now, there had to be at some point a fallow period. Between when the ranchers were, mixing with the polo players.
Yes, unfortunately, that's true.
And why does that happen?
Well, the military left. After World War II, there was no semblance of military in this area. But then following that, a severe drought hit in the 50s, and it really ruined a lot of the ranches. So the ranchers who had means and had sent their daughters to Europe to travel no longer had that means. And so it lost its economic footing too at the same time that it lost a lot of cultural attributes. And from the 50s on, Marfa has struggled. And as the older generation died out, the younger generation didn't have the background, they didn't have the means to establish the same kind of culture here that had preceded them. And unfortunately, as time went on, many people left. The town grew more and more poverty-stricken, and the commercial area just practically disappeared.
Well, let's keep riding with that then, because obviously Marfa today, I've only been here a little while, relatively speaking, but it seems clear to me that this is a town that is changing rapidly, and it's changing in the direction of culture. The restaurants that are opening up, we just had an Indian-oriented restaurant open up. I don't think you would have seen that 40 years ago. There's no shortage of artists, no shortage of writers, no shortages of foundations. Where did that emerge from? I guess there's a puzzle to me, which is how did Marfa get to be the way it is? It is not a common West Texas town.
Oh, that's our Louise O'Connor and I are working on the third volume of the history, and that is our primary emphasis on delving into the development of the new culture and the new Marfa, and it is fascinating. It started. We have judged there are 4 waves of development in Marfa during the past 50 years. It started with when Donald Judd came out, and he.
Okay, when was that for folks who don't know?
Well, he came out in the early 70s, but he didn't establish connections with the Dale Foundation until around 1980.
And when did he? Well, we'll get to the history. When did he establish a connection with Cecilia Thompson? Were you friends of his?
Well, when I was commissioned to write the county history, the Dale Foundation gave me a writer's residence out at what is now Shinati, and Donald Judd was the director then, so I was thrown into contact with him out there.
Well, now, thrown into contact, there are a lot of people thrown into contact with me who I wouldn't necessarily think of as a friend. Were you and Donald Judd tight at any point, or were you just acquaintances?
No, not tight. I don't think anyone was tight with Donald Judd.
Right.
But I really enjoyed and appreciated his art. My apartment looked over the old gun shed with all the aluminum pieces in it, and it was a daily delight.
Okay.
I walked down among the cement blocks. But and he was supportive of my history also.
I took us off track because I was interested in that. But you did live where Chinati is now. You lived in, I guess, in a Dia Foundation apartment.
The Dale Foundation was in charge of it when I lived out there. Yes.
Okay, and that was that time, say 1970-ish to 1980-ish. That would be the first wave of the,
yes.
Call it the Marfa Renaissance or the Marfa emergence.
Okay, and the second wave came when Tim Crowley and the DeGarons, Charles Mary Kubrick and Ron Summers, they came out in around the late 90s, 97, 98. And Tim Crowley and Pablo Alvarado bought up a number of the business buildings on Highland Avenue and restored them. And the appearance of the place really blossomed.
Okay, when would that be then?
That started in around 1997.
Okay, so that's the second wave, which is basically I'm laughing when I say it, but it's true. It's a redistribution of property and fixing it up as well. But
yes.
The town was gentrified in a way in the mid '90s.
Yes.
Okay.
And the third wave was the coming of the foundations. The Dia Foundation was already here, and the Shinati Foundation, the Lannan Foundation with the writers in residence, and I spoke to Patrick Lannan about why he selected Marfa. It's very interesting. He came to a Shinati open house weekend and was thrilled by the place. He came back later and explored the possibility of finding residences, which he found, and that started the Writers Residence Group. And the ballroom came in 2003, and Fairfax Dorn and Jenny Lieberman.
Are you calling that the fourth wave then, the ballroom?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through it again. So first wave is Donald Judd from about 70 to 80. The second wave is buying and fixing up this property around where KRTS is. This is Highland, and you look across the street. There used to be a hotel there, I think, in the 30s and 40s, and now it's a Judd Foundation. It's a nice-looking street. It could fit in anywhere and be proud of itself. Third wave, then, would be the Lannan Foundation?
The Lannan, the ballroom.
Yeah.
And, of course, the Shinati Foundation was established. But that was the onset of the entry of writers, artists, drama. So it really grew. The fourth wave is going on right now. The entry of you and all the younger people who've come in, who've heard about it and have sought some kind of creative refuge. Louise and I call you the new pioneers because you came out here for the same reason that the original pioneers came, to make new lives, to leave what you had behind you, and to delve into whatever creative fields. Those were ranchers. They wanted to, feed their cattle and raise their stock. But you want to feed your souls.
Well, this brings up a lot of stuff. I wrote down a note here when we were talking about the fire, and it ties into the history, which is this. The fire has been here for, I think, 6 days now. And one of the things that KRTS did, speaking of feeding the soul and speaking of history, is that instead of just giving information, we wanted stories. And so we solicited on the radio, on Facebook, by word of mouth, any way we could, that if you had a story to tell us, bring it in and we'll interview you. And then maybe later, far down the road, we'll make a collage of this stuff and we'll call it a radio show, but really it will be a radio history. And I'm wondering if, along with the new pioneers and so forth, if there isn't kind of a new storytelling of Marfa as well. And I guess I would include you as a new pioneer in that respect too, because you're working on a history of up to 2005. That's more than a history. That's contemporary.
Well, it is, but of course I'm a native of the area.
Well, let's go through. Okay, let me just, before we move on, you grew up in a ranch between Fort Davis and Marfa.
No, out of Fort Davis.
The other side. Okay, yeah. North Fort Davis. You grew up in a ranch. You know how to ride a horse. You know ranching stuff. You
yes.
lived in Marfa. You lived in Alpine. And we'll get back to the theme in just a second. But time is wasting. I want people to know about you. You've lived in New York for a while. You wrote soap operas.
Yes.
And before that, you had a PhD in theater history. And
theater arts, actually.
Theater arts, okay. Thank you for the correction. And there are going to be more corrections coming down because a lot of what I've heard is possibly legend. But one of the things I heard is that you were the second, that is only the second, PhD in theater arts in the United States of America. Is that true?
That's not true.
Okay. Have you heard that story?
No, I hadn't.
Okay. Well, you heard it here first. I also heard, as long as we're getting personal, I have heard that you go to work 5 days a week, that you smoke American spirits and you change from Virginia Slims, that you drink a little bit of scotch every night.
No, that's not true.
That's not true.
I hate to disappoint you. But what I drink every night is a cup of chamomile tea.
Chamomile tea.
That's a letdown.
It is a letdown. But I'm happy that you're a smoker. What about coffee? I've heard that you drink coffee every morning.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I have heard, let's see. Oh, gosh, I have so much to get to. I've heard the slight rumor, only one person said this, that you might be working on a soap opera about Marfa, Texas.
No.
No chance. Well, tell us about your soap opera work back in New York, way back.
Well, it didn't last for too long a period. Mm-hmm. I wrote the scripts for a show that was that came out of One Life to Live. Now, I didn't know anything about soap opera. I'd never watched it. Mm-hmm. But someone who was involved in it suggested that I write a preview show for the producer, which I did. The show was named Texas. So, of course,
I know about that.
Oh, you do?
That was you? Oh, my gosh.
Well, I wasn't the main writer. I got to tell you this.
Okay.
The main writer develops the plot.
Uh-huh.
And they send out every day a little half-page synopsis. And the second writers then developed it into an hour show. And that's what I did. I did the tedious work.
Well, now, but you've also been a director. Have you been an actress as well?
Yes, I have.
And what kind of stuff did you direct? Theater?
Oh, yes. Oh, I've directed all of my professional career. I only started writing after I retired.
So history writing, I mean, you say you've retired. That's funny. You go to work 5 days a week and you're working on, I've never written anything longer than a postcard, and you're working on like your third or fourth book and you're saying you're retired. But right. What you meant is you retired from one career.
Yes, that's right. I retired from one career and started working.
You've had a bunch of them. I heard that you worked for a little while as part of the Border Patrol. Is that
Yes,
true?
I did.
And when was that?
Well, that was in the early 90s.
And how was that? Was that a period you look upon
I
fondly?
thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay.
I was the receptionist in the Marfa station. I was the only woman there, and I really liked that.
Okay, I have, more history about you and more history about Marfa. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to ask you some questions about Marfa again, and then I'll go back to history about you. There was an earthquake that has now become legendary, and this is the legend. You can straighten us out. That Valentine was a big city. Valentine was the king city of this area, and an earthquake flattened it. And then the trains stopped coming, and that flattened the economy, and now Valentine has 250 people. What's the truth?
Well, that is really folklore. I never heard that before.
Well, you heard it here first.
I heard it here first.
Well,
there
what's the truth?
there was an earthquake in 1930. I was 10 years old, so I remember it at the ranch. It cracked our walls open at the ranch house, but it did open a portion of the earth close to Valentine. Valentine has always been a very small village, but the earthquake shook up the whole country. It didn't really permanently damage anything except that crack in the earth.
Do you know that yesterday was, in spite of all that's going on, there was a little bit of history that came by Marfa yesterday as well. I heard that an Amtrak train was coming through town and stopped. They had someone very sick in town, and they stopped the train in Marfa, and someone came and picked up the train rider who was ill. But that would make it the first train in how long to stop in Marfa? And I guess when did the train stop?
Well, several people have asked me that, and I'm ashamed to say I'm unable to say. It must have been in the 70s sometime.
And did the train stop because Marfa couldn't support the industry, or did the train stoppage stop Marfa industry?
Well, it was the train's decision because, when they changed from steam engines to the more modern type, they didn't need to stop in all these little towns. It was a watering stop.
Would you like the train to stop in Marfa?
Yes, I would.
Why?
Well, because I think it brings an interesting event once a day, or twice a day.
Right.
I don't want the freight trains to stop, but the passenger trains would be fun. Originally, when the passenger trains came through Marfa, people rushed down to see who would come or go.
But Marfa thrives, I think, on a certain type of isolation. And if you make it too easy to get here, then the people who get here will be too easy. I like it being hard to get here. What about you?
Not like to see what?
I like it that it's difficult to get to Marfa, Texas.
Well,
I like the fact that it feels like an island, and you got to care.
Yes,
to be
I
here.
like that too.
And you got to go out of your way and mean to be here. You don't
That's right.
Get lost.
You have to want to be here, right?
Okay, let's see what else we got here. Every person I spoke to, every single person, without exception, had some issue about haunting. Everyone said, "Is this haunted? Is that haunted? Is this And I could go through the list. Everyone seems to think that their house in particular is Charles Mary. There are people think the brothel that Terry Allen used to live in uptown was haunted. The Marfa Bank, some person gets an itchy feeling that maybe there was a murder there. The ghost house next to Padres. Padres, of course, was a funeral home. I've always maintained, by the way, that funeral homes are the least hauntable buildings in our society because you're guaranteed no one dies there, and you're guaranteed no one's buried there. So to say that your funeral home is haunted is like saying this stretch of street, that this hearse drove on is haunted. In any case, people all over, the place I used to live, I call it Madres South. It's down there by what's now Marfa Burrito Company. Lots of legends about that. Is there any place in town that you think, or have you heard, or is there any place that might even warrant the germ, the seed of the legend of being haunted in Marfa, Texas?
I think you have more material on that than I do.
Come on, you must have heard something.
No, that's folklore. I've been interested in history.
History, though, is largely what people say,
Well,
even if it's wrong, and they can talk to each other.
But to be truthful, I haven't heard about any hats.
What about the Paisano? Was that haunted?
Not that I ever heard of. It should be, I think, at times.
Okay, so we have wow, people are going to be shocked to hear that. Okay, let's look for more stuff. We have the Cattleman's Bank across the street. That's where the Judd Foundation is now. I'm looking at the building, and the capacity-wise, it might be the biggest building in town. Was that building? It was a hotel. Must have been a very dignified hotel at one point.
Yes, it was the St. George Hotel, and it was a 2-story building, and it's been totally rebuilt. The top floor burned, and so the whole building was rebuilt. But it was the center place for a lot of social life, a lot of activity. In a remote place like Marfa, the hotel life is very important because people have to have a place to come to stay. The ranchers would come a long distance into town and stay the weekend, and unless they stayed with friends, they stayed in the hotel. The St. George flourished, but then after the days of the St. George, the Cruise Hotel took place, and that's where the Judd Foundation building is. And it was a very elegant hotel with a great dining room, and I remember it in the late 30s. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the Paisano was built in 1930. And the Paisano is a landmark because it was designed by A.L. Trost, who is the outstanding Southwestern architect. And he built that hotel, the one in Van Horn, and one in Marathon. So he was well known in the area.
Hey, I'm trying to get a go-ahead that we can keep talking, but until they pull me out of this chair, I'm going to keep speaking to you, Cecilia. What about the building that we're in right now, the KRTS headquarters? Was this also something? I've heard that this was a hotel as well.
It was part of the hotel.
I've heard there was a fire here. Is that correct?
Well, this whole building, from here to the end of the block, was part of the hotel. A lot of this has been added to.
And what was there a fire on Highland that took down this building and the one next to it, or is that also a legend, like the my ghost stories?
Well, there was a fire at the corner there, where the bookstore is. Mm-hmm. And it burned. And that building didn't cover this whole block. But these buildings were added after the hotel fire. There were not many buildings that you see around here.
Right. But I get the impression that when someone built a building between 1920 and 1950, they made a big statement out of it and probably took more effort and time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, you can kind of see that when you walk through the downtown of Marfa, is that the buildings that are old are the buildings that are really impressive.
Aren't they?
I agree.
Aren't they? I think Highland Avenue is outstanding.
Yeah.
You won't find another street like that in West Texas.
Why are the streets so wide?
Well, a lot of people have asked that. Uh-huh. And I think that probably when they surveyed it, the county courthouse was built first, and its width kind of decided the width of the avenue. There was plenty of space. So why not have a wide street?
I heard about horses and carriages for the Mexican-American War needed to fit through. Is that not the case?
During the horses and carriages.
Yeah, that the streets are wide to accommodate a military procession.
No, that's not right.
It's not right.
The streets were wide before the military came.
Oh,
but it did accommodate. They had parades and all kinds of celebratory things from the military, and Highland Avenue lent itself beautifully to it.
Right.
They weren't built for that purpose.
This is definitely a parade town.
Yes, it is.
Listen, I'm batting about 50-50 as far as my legends versus truth, and I think I'm going to probably start batting a little bit less now. But I want to ask you about the history of segregation in Marfa. And this would be, of course, segregation between Hispanics flowing into the area and the white ranches and ranchers mostly at that time. But I've heard that there was segregation, school segregation in Marfa, Texas until 1978. Is that correct? That seems
Until
awfully late.
1965.
1965. Do you have any idea where that late 1978 date comes from?
I don't know. I don't know what that date refers to.
You know what I would love to do with you when we have more time sometime is go try to trace where untruths come from, where myths come from. Because I talked to a lot of people. I'm talking with Dr. Thompson, and all types of things came up. And it's amazing that they're all interesting. No one starts a story or legend if it's not going to be interesting. So I think there might be a need for just kind of like the spice of life doesn't necessarily need to include truth. Okay, so there was segregation in Marfa until 1965. How did that manifest itself?
Well, the Hispanic people came to this area with the Anglos because the ranchers could not have made it without them. They lived with the families on the ranches, and then when the town was established, the support of the town. And the Hispanic community has always been prominent in Marfa. And the people have created the area and contributed to what it is as much as the Anglos. But unfortunately, segregation and racial discrimination existed. And they really didn't come into any degree of prominence because of their position in life that they were placed in. After World War II, the veterans then had means to build homes and to establish businesses. So there were more established Hispanic businesses in. And eventually, the Hispanic people became part of the county and city government. And now they form the primary part of those governing bodies.
Okay, but if I came to town in 1962, if I was just walking through here for a few days, which is what people do when they're tourists now, what would I have seen? Would I have noticed any segregation? Would I have noticed a good and bad side of the tracks? Would I have noticed a Hispanic movie theater and a white movie theater?
Yes, you would have.
In restaurants, did the restaurants specify who could eat there and who could not?
Well, yes, there were restaurants. There were Mexican restaurants that served Mexican food that the people have always supported. But unfortunately, in the early days, the Mexican people weren't allowed to eat in them.
Wow. Okay.
And, they were totally segregated so far as restaurants were concerned. They could buy hardware and, merchandise.
And did this all change from the outside by the osmosis of the civil rights movement from the South and the East of the United States?
It had a great influence on it.
Or here's the other possibility. Was there, in fact, in Marfa and West Texas, some stirring up of civil rights movement in itself?
Well, I think the civil rights movement itself, it really was over time for it to have an effect here.
Yeah.
Because everyone recognized the fact that the Hispanic families had played a prominent role in the settlement of the area.
When you were growing up in Alpine, Marfa, outside Fort Davis, what relations did you have with the Hispanic families? Did you even know any, or was it easy sailing? I mean, I'm thinking about a lot of times the racial relations in towns where there is segregation are not nearly as stereotypically bad as people think. There's lots of mixing.
You're so right.
Right.
My
It's almost, if I may, it's almost like it's a rule change. It's not a personality change, and it's not an emotional change. It's a change of what people are allowed to do, but not how they're allowed to relate.
I think you're quite right. When I was growing up on the ranch, a Hispanic family lived on the ranch, and the father worked with my dad. He didn't work for him, and the mother worked in the house with my mother, and they had a daughter. They had several children, but they had a daughter who was my age, and we grew up like sisters.
Wow.
And her daughter now lives in Marfa, and we're very close.
Huh. Well, as long as I've kind of made that bridge to talking about Cecilia, let me get to some more of my Dr. Thompson fun facts. When Dr. Cecilia Thompson cooks, she cooks only from scratch. You don't use anything that comes in a package when you cook. True or false?
I never heard of that.
Okay, I can't reveal my sources, but that's good to know. We're getting to the truth of things. You don't see very well, and yet you go to art openings, and you have someone describe to you what you're looking at.
Exactly.
And can you appreciate the art that way? And who is your describer?
Oh, I can see enough that I really, really do get the effect of it. It's details many times.
Well, I'm concerned that, if your describer is too optimistic, you might be enjoying art that perhaps you should be criticizing. On the other hand, if you had me as your art describer, you might not like anything.
Well,
so I want to know who it is.
I don't depend on the descriptions.
Okay. You were the head of a theater department at Texas Tech.
Yes.
That's correct? Were you a professor?
I directed the program there.
Well, hold on. Did people call you Professor Thompson?
Yes, I had my PhD part of that time, and I was Dr. Thompson.
Okay, so you really have had very different types of careers.
Yes.
And okay, someone mentioned that you were compelled to take loyalty oaths during the MacArthur era.
Right.
Well, tell me about that. Why you and not, the 99.9% of the rest of the country?
Well,
it's because you were in the theater?
All people in education had to take that oath.
Oh, in education. I was thinking it was all people in the arts, because I know I live in Los Angeles when I'm not here, and the story is that somehow the McCarthy era considered the arts, particularly theater and films, to be particularly dangerous and influential, and so those were the people who were focused upon to give loyalty oaths.
No, that wasn't the case, because I was, a college professor.
Mm-hmm. Are there brothels in Marfa? I'm not going to ask you if there are brothels in Marfa right now, because that's none of our business, but were there historically?
Not that I know of.
Oh, come on. What about you? You know that the Allen House...
I've heard the story.
Well, what do you need as proof?
So far as I know historically, very conventional, respectable families live there.
Well, I can tell you that even the respectable families like to get out once in a while. So you're telling me then you don't know of any haunted houses, and you don't know of any brothels in Marfa, Texas?
No, you're going into the area of folklore.
I'm doing what I have to do.
People love to do that.
The Capote waterfall is something that interests me. Apparently, there is a waterfall around town, and when it gets particularly hot here, people give you about 5 different directions about where it is and how to get there. What's the bottom line on that? Where is it, and how big is it?
Well, it's some distance away. The waterfalls begin and fall on the edge of the Bright Ranch, which is southwest of here. And it falls into an arroyo that is very hard to reach. To get to the falls, you have to go through 2 or 3 ranchers' property. Therefore, you have to get permission to go through, to open the gates. And it's very close to the Rio Grande, actually.
I heard this. Do you mind if I just keep going through these things one after the other?
Right.
Okay. Why are there so many movie theaters in Marfa? This goes back to what you were saying about the DNA of the town being very cultural. And before I even begin with that, let me ask you, just as a historian, do you think towns, communities in general, have a certain cultural DNA so that 200 years, 100 years after a town is created, it will still have certain themes of behavior?
Yes, I do. I do. A child carries traits of his childhood into maturity.
Right. Okay. So getting back to what I was asking then, the theaters, you attribute that, as I do, I guess, after what you said, to the fact that Marfa was a cultural place. That's why we have so many theaters, the Palace and, yeah?
Well, I can't explain this really, but, a number of movies have been made here.
Yes, that's right.
And it's been kind of a place that has attracted the industry. But you're right, that the Palace Theater was the first theater in the area to have sound.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And when you were a little girl, did people come from other towns to
Oh,
Marfa?
yes, absolutely. We would have to come to Marfa to the movie because there was some kind of makeshift one in Fort Davis briefly, but Marfa was closer than Alpine, and so we came here. I want to tell you something. I always knew when I was in for a lecture about the facts of life because my mother would bring me over here to a Sunday matinee.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, by the way, I was just as you were saying that, I was circling a quote that someone said here that you were. I use the term midwife of culture in this town, but someone told me that you were instrumental in maintaining and bringing arts and culture to this town. They cite that when the early days of the Lannan readers, you would take the Lannan writers around town, you would give them a personalized tour.
Well, I wish that was true. But I do take the Latin writers on a historic tour. But I didn't help establish it.
No. They're not saying that. What they are, this is the crux of what people have told me, is that when art comes to a town, a West Texas town, any small town, anywhere, when art comes to that town, there are people who will condemn it. They'll say it's new, it's a change, and they will not welcome it. And then there are a handful of natives, like yourself, people who've been here who have the authority of having been in the area and knowing the area, who, if they welcome it, they give it a certain premature of acceptance. And this is what people said you did. So with Donald Judd, you said you weren't a friend of his. People said that when he came to town, he met with skepticism, if not cynicism, but you welcomed him. You didn't have to be friends with him, but you appreciated that he was an artist and he chose this town to come to. That when Lannan came to this town, you appreciated that there were new people coming in this town who read books. And when you write a book about Marfa and Presidio County, what you're doing is you are giving a certain type of integrity and importance to what you write about. You're saying, look, where I live is important enough to write a large book about, and a book that will win an award, and so are the people. And so what I heard from a collection of people is that you enabled culture in Marfa somewhat. Do you buy that?
Well, I hope that part of that is true. I certainly don't take a great deal of credit, but I do support it wholeheartedly.
We are at the end of our time. In fact, we were at the end of our time a half an hour ago. I don't know why they didn't knock down the doors and kick us out, but I want to ask you if you have anything to say. You can ask me a question. No one has ever done that on the radio before.
Yes, I would like to ask you something.
I was just joking.
Okay, what is your background?
Okay. Well, first of all, I've had this idea that instead of having a daily show where the Talk at 10 people ask questions, that people just every day I'd have a new person who asks me more questions. But my background is, my mom is from Mexico. Oh, and I want to talk. She came over here many, many years ago, and it's interesting that this is an issue now. But when she came here, there was no border issue. She is in her early 80s. She came over here probably in the 40s. And my father's family, he died a while ago, but his family is from Ukraine. And I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I went west as many times as I could, and one time they didn't bring me back, and I stayed out in Los Angeles. And then I came here to visit my friend David Beebe after he had built Padres, and I stayed. That was a couple years ago. And I would say one way I might be different than a variety of other tourists who come here is I came here and I've stayed here primarily because for Padres originally, and then for KRTS, Marfa Public Radio. And it wasn't only after I kind of discovered these two prizes that I realized that there's a lot of art in this town. There's some really fabulous people and all the rest. But originally I just drove into town. I only knew one person in one place, and then I discovered the radio, and that's basically what I've been doing since I've been here.
This is very interesting. Louise O'Connor and I have pursued this topic. Why did you come and why do you stay? And we've asked a number of the newcomers that. And we have gotten a varied number of answers, but it's come down to pretty much the same thing. They came to get away from something and to find something new. They stay because they love the sky, the fresh air, the beautiful landscape, and the friendly people. If you get right down to
Yeah.
essentials.
Well, you know what? I'm one of these guys who hates to be categorized, but I think you nailed it. I think those two general groups, I fall into both of them. I came to get away some stuff. I lived in a big city with a bad economy, cars everywhere. It was 2009 when it was possible that Los Angeles wasn't going to be around anymore. And I came to Marfa, didn't know anything about it, and I stayed, well, let's just be frank, because of people like yourself. I've been talking since I've been here and listening once in a while too.
And you have a pioneer spirit.
I have a pioneer spirit. Well, I thank you very much. I'll tell you what, let's end on that. Dr. Cecilia Thompson, thank you so much for joining me for this interview, and I hope you come back. And all I can say is this is KRTS Marfa Public Radio. You just heard what I think is an extraordinary interview, and if you want to hear more stuff about the Rock House Fire, well, stay tuned in.